Kia ora. I'm Ricardo Sosa, and this is a 10-minute presentation entitled I Am a Strange Creative Loop. The title comes from a book of the same name by Douglas Hofstadter, and in this book, he brings ideas from philosophy, computer science, cognitive science, mathematics, and his own personal life, including some passages from his childhood and growing up, to talk about how humans, people, so it's not about himself necessarily, but the I as the self, how humans are capable of thinking, but also capable of thinking about thinking. And he uses this metaphor of the camera pointing to the screen, creating a video feedback loop that produces oftentimes unexpected results, emergent results. And so the book is a lot about emergence and the emergence between the body and the brain, thinking and being in the world, and also thinking about thinking and creating this kind of like multi-layered system of perception and cognition. And reading this book, I thought it made me think a lot about my own experience as a designer, experience of 25 years now as a designer, and also in the last 15 years as a researcher. And the combination of these experiences of being a designer and that shaping my research, and also being a researcher and that shaping my design work. So I've identified tensions and opportunities between design and research activities in what I do, and also what my colleagues do, what our PhD students do. Also between tensions and opportunities between theory and practice in design education and design research, and between our teaching and learning activities. So this is not, although the title of the talk is I Am a Strange Creative Loop, this is not a talk about myself. It could be called All Design Researchers Are Strange Creative Loops, but that's not the same type of title. So for a long time, I've heard, I am interested, and I've heard people being interested in this domain asking, what is design? Who is a designer? I bring ideas by Latin American scholars like Orlando Fals Borda to talk about sentipensante. Sentipensante is a word that combines sentir and pensar, feeling and thinking as one thing. So avoiding the division between feeling, emotions, and rational thought. And I would add a third one there, which is to create, crear. So sentir, pensar, crear, to feel, to think, to create, as one holistic activity that we do, rather than something that can be neatly separated or divided. And so I feel that this creative loop has some strangeness to it, and I feel that it connects research and design, sometimes in conflict, but often in, I think we have a lot to develop in the future to make this connection reach. So I bring two vignettes very quickly because I don't have a lot of time, but these are from experiences I've had over the years, with particular emphasis in the last year. I've taught in the program of creative technologies, and I've taught studio and also non-studio courses, what we call core or elective courses. These are 15-point courses that are traditionally called theoretical, although you will see that I differ with that way of talking about them. But there is a general culture in design schools and in creative technologies areas that by students, by academics, that non-studio courses are less relevant, less interesting, less important to the program. There is a definite division between staff who teach the studio, staff who teach core or elective courses. And over we hear, for instance, recently we had an external review of our program and recommendations to close that gap and to bring the theory, the history, the philosophy of what we do closer to the practice. If anything, primarily to promote reflective practice in better ways. The second vignette that I talk about is research that I conduct, particularly the research in cross-disciplinary teams in the community outside of the university. And in that space, we've had a lot of imposition from funders and from our own ethics committee that have really gotten in the way of what we do and make our lives, our work, very difficult in terms of integrating the design, the creative. So if you do the traditional design part and the traditional research part, things are run smoothly. The moment you start to combine these things, the system kicks back. There is a certain amount of imposter syndrome in this space that I've experienced myself, not in the sense of not being prepared, which is the usual meaning of imposter syndrome, but more in the sense of, do I belong here? So when I work in projects that are traditionally had been public health projects, or traditionally had been education problems projects, or engineering projects, and I'm the only designer in the group, it tends to be noticeable, and people ask questions or make comments that often can feed on my own imposter syndrome. Ultimately, the problems that I'm interested in working with other specialists from other areas are exactly the type of problems that are not neatly divided into silos like the university is divided. And I think that the way the university divides the world into these kind of like disciplines and faculties and schools and departments is ultimately really, really out of touch with what we need to be doing. Another clear example is in postgraduate studies, we divide format 1, traditional manuscript, format 3, creative practice. I think that division just creates a binary way of thinking about the world. And in every single PhD project that I'm involved supervising, we bring these two together and we blur that silly line between these formats. So yeah, we see a division between ways of knowing that is highly paradoxical, very arbitrary, more historical than anything else, and more and very perverse. So we see these days in around Aotearoa, New Zealand, new design schools, new design programs emerging, and they tend to start right from the beginning with this kind of like old ways, like 20th century way of understanding design and dividing it in silos and specialties and so on. There are exceptions, of course. In design education, we tend to throw the word theory around. Usually it's used as, oh, it's you need to read. Oh, it's a theory. Well, reading is not theory. So a lot of what we call theory in design is not theory at all of any type. People use it in despective ways to say it's boring or you need to read. And mainly from an anti-intellectualism point of view of designers and design educators. And in design research, we also call practice really not what is practice. The best example is to see whether the people and doing the research and supervising the research are actually engaged in creative practice. So I think we need to trouble things like the curriculum, the pedagogies that we use, the timetabling practices, and the way we talk about design education and research, because we tend to go to dogmatic thinking. So we either go to the sciences and we grasp that dogma of the sciences, or alternatively, we criticize the sciences and then we go to the arts, and then we subscribe to the dogmas of the fine arts. But that's not, so where I'm coming from is from a third space of letting the dogmas go and troubling what we do in new ways. Very quickly, the futures of design scholarship, I think we need to focus on design praxis. So the critical combination of practice and theory, and bring that together. The studio as the ideal place to do this, to bring pluriversal ways of knowing and coming together. Realizing, identifying these creative loops and fostering these creative loops, the strange creative loops in our students, in our postgraduate students, undergraduate students, and our colleagues, and to use them to generate, apply, and evaluate design knowledge or design knowledges. I believe we need to leave behind 20th century way of dividing between research and teaching, between practice and theory, between teachers and students. The work of Paulo Freire, he calls them teacher students and student teachers, to resolve this silly kind of like hierarchical division. I am Ricardo Sosa. You can find more about my work and myself in that link. And thank you so much for the organizers of this symposium. I look forward to the question and answer section and also to listening and learning from all the presenters in Aotearoa, New Zealand, in Brazil, in Colombia, and elsewhere in South America. Muchas gracias and kia ora.